The morning shift at Meridian Prime always started the same way for Commander Vex Thornfield. Coffee that tasted like metal shavings, reports that nobody read, and the endless stream of civilians who thought their little pieces of plastic meant something important. The orbital station hummed around him, a massive wheel spinning slowly against the backdrop of 3 different suns. Ships came and went every hour, carrying diplomats, traders, and tourists between the stars. Thornfield stood at Security Checkpoint 7, the main gateway to the diplomatic sector. His uniform was pressed sharp, his boots polished to mirror brightness, and his mood as sour as week-old milk. 23 years in the service, and this is where they put him, babysitting civilians and checking identification cards like some mall security guard back on Earth. The morning crowd was typical. Andromedian merchants with their 6 arms juggling data tablets. Tall, graceful Cillians who moved like dancers even when walking. A few humans scattered in the mix, most of them trying too hard to look important. Thornfield processed them all with mechanical efficiency, his scanner beeping approval after approval. Then she walked up to his station. The woman looked ordinary enough, medium height, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing clothes that screamed civilian from across the room. No fancy diplomatic robes, no military bearing, no obvious signs of wealth or power. Just a plain jacket, comfortable pants, and a small travel bag slung over her shoulder. She moved with quiet confidence, but that didn't impress Thornfield. Everyone thought they were important these days. She placed her identification on his scanner without a word. The device beeped and displayed basic information. Elena Vasquez, 34 years old, civilian status, requesting access to the diplomatic quarter. Thornfield glanced at the screen, then at her, then back at the screen with growing irritation. Civilian badge, he said, making the word sound like an insult. What's your business in the diplomatic sector, Miss Vasquez? Dr. Vasquez, she corrected gently. I have a meeting with the Galactic Medical Alliance representatives. Thornfield snorted. Doctor, huh? Let me guess. You've got some miracle cure that's going to save the galaxy? He tapped his screen lazily, not bothering to run a deep scan. Sorry, Doc, but the diplomatic quarter is for real diplomats. People who actually matter in the grand scheme of things. Elena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I understand your caution, Commander. Perhaps if you ran a full credential check. Perhaps if you understood that I've been doing this job since before you got out of medical school. Thornfield shot back. He was warming up now, enjoying himself. Other civilians in line were watching, and he liked having an audience. You civilians are all the same. You think because you've got some fancy degree and a civilian badge you can waltz into restricted areas like you own the place. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Tell you what, Doc, why don't you head back to whatever tourist deck you came from, and let the real professionals handle the important stuff. Elena remained perfectly calm. Commander Thornfield, I assure you my credentials are in order. If you would just complete the scan. Oh, I'll complete it when I'm good and ready, Thornfield said, his voice rising. And right now I'm not ready. In fact, I'm starting to think you might be up to something suspicious. Civilian trying to push her way into the diplomatic sector, getting defensive when questioned. Other security officers at nearby checkpoints were starting to notice the commotion. So were the travelers in line. Thornfield felt a familiar rush of power, the satisfaction of putting someone in their place. It was one of the few perks of this dead-end assignment. I could detain you for suspicious behavior, he continued, tapping his scanner theatrically. Hold you for questioning. Run background checks that might take hours, days even, he smiled coldly. Funny how these things work when people don't show proper respect to station security. Elena's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained level. Commander, I'm simply trying to reach a scheduled meeting. My identification contains all necessary authorizations. Your identification contains a civilian badge and a pretty story, Thornfield said, and I decide what's necessary around here. He glanced at the growing line of travelers behind her. Maybe you should have thought about that before trying to push your way past security. Near the edge of his vision, Thornfield noticed a small group of aliens watching the exchange with interest. They wore elaborate robes in shimmering colors, and their bearing suggested nobility or high rank. Crystalline beings with elegant features and jeweled ornaments. Probably some diplomatic delegation getting entertainment from watching a human civilian get put in her place. Good, he thought. Let them see how humans handle security. Show them we don't just roll over for anyone with a sob story. Commander, Elena said quietly, I really must insist that you complete the credential scan. My meeting is quite important. Thornfield laughed out loud. Important to who, you? Lady, I've processed real diplomats today. Ambassadors who represent entire star systems. Trade ministers who control shipping routes worth billions. Military attachés with the power to start wars. He gestured dismissively at her civilian clothes. And you think your little meeting is important? The crystalline aliens had moved closer, close enough that Thornfield could see their expressions. They looked concerned, almost worried. One of them, taller than the rest with more elaborate robes, kept glancing between Elena and Thornfield with what looked like growing alarm. You know what I think? Thornfield continued riding the wave of his own righteousness. I think you're exactly the kind of civilian who gives humans a bad name out here. Thinking you're special. Thinking the rules don't apply to you. Thinking your little civilian badge opens every door in the galaxy. He stood up from his chair, using his height to loom over her. Well, here's a newsflash, Doc. Out here in the real world, among real people doing real jobs, that civilian status of yours means exactly nothing. Less than nothing. Elena's composure finally showed a crack. Her hands clenched slightly at her sides, and when she spoke, there was steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. Commander Thornfield, I am asking you one final time to complete the proper credential scan. There are protocols for diplomatic quarter access, and I have followed every one of them. And I'm telling you one final time that I decide who gets through my checkpoint. Thornfield shot back. Not you, not your credentials, and certainly not some civilian badge that probably came out of a cereal box. The tall crystalline being stepped forward, clearly agitated now. Other aliens in the area had stopped their conversations and were watching with expressions of growing concern. Some looked shocked, others confused, and a few seemed almost frightened. Thornfield glanced at them with satisfaction. Let them see human authority in action. Let them understand that humans didn't bow down to every civilian with a hard luck story and a civilian identification badge. He had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, his entire career would be over. He had no idea that the quiet woman standing in front of him had saved more lives than anyone else in the galaxy. And he had absolutely no idea that several of the aliens watching him owed their very existence to the unimportant civilian he was so thoroughly humiliating. The scanner sat on his desk, still waiting to complete its analysis of Elena Vasquez's credentials. Thornfield never bothered to hit the button. The tall crystalline being could not stay silent any longer. His name was Ambassador Veltar of the Royal Zephyrian Court, and what he was witnessing made his entire body shimmer with distress. The harmonic frequencies that served as his species' emotional expressions were fluctuating wildly, creating small rainbow patterns across his translucent skin. He approached Commander Thornfield's station with careful, measured steps. His ceremonial robes rustled softly, the sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Behind him, other members of the Zephyrian delegation watched with growing alarm. They had recognized Dr. Elena Vasquez the moment she approached the checkpoint. And what they were seeing now defied all understanding. Commander, Veltar said quietly, his voice carrying the musical undertones typical of his species. Commander, do you know who you just stopped? Thornfield glanced at the alien with obvious irritation. He was in the middle of enjoying his power trip, and he didn't appreciate the interruption. The crystalline being looked important, probably some diplomat or trade representative, but that didn't give him the right to interfere with station security. Yeah, I know exactly who I stopped, Thornfield said loudly, making sure everyone in the area could hear him. Some civilian who thinks her little badge means she can go anywhere she wants. He gestured dismissively at Elena, who stood perfectly still, watching the exchange with careful eyes. Veltar's harmonics shifted to frequencies that indicated extreme concern. In his species' culture, what was happening here was beyond comprehension. It would be like watching someone insult the most revered healer in Zephyrian history, someone whose name was spoken with reverence in every household across their homeworld. Commander, please. Veltar tried again, stepping closer and lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. That woman is nobody special, Thornfield interrupted, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. And you know what, Crystal Face? This is human station security, which means you need to mind your own business and let me do my job. The casual racism in Thornfield's tone hit Veltar like a physical blow. Other aliens in the area heard it too, and conversations began to stop as heads turned toward the checkpoint. What had started as a simple security interaction was rapidly becoming something much more serious. Veltar's robes shimmered as his emotional state fluctuated between shock and desperate urgency. He had to make this human understand, had to prevent what was rapidly becoming a diplomatic catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. "Commander Thornfield," he said, reading the name from Thornfield's uniform, "I am Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian Royal Court. I am formally requesting that you reconsider your treatment of Dr. Vasquez." Thornfield turned fully toward the alien now, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Having his authority challenged in public was bad enough, but being challenged by an alien made it 10 times worse. He could feel other humans in the area watching, and his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Oh, you're formally requesting, are you?" Thornfield said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, let me formally explain something to you, Ambassador. This is my checkpoint on a human station, and I don't take requests from aliens about how to do my job." The word aliens came out like a curse. Veltar's harmonics shifted to frequencies that his people associated with profound sorrow and disbelief. Around the checkpoint area, other non-human travelers were beginning to pay serious attention to what was happening. Elena Vasquez had remained silent during this exchange, but now she spoke up, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to cut through the growing tension. "Commander Thornfield, perhaps we could simply complete the credential scan and resolve this matter quietly." "Quietly?" Thornfield laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the station's metal walls. "Lady, you lost your chance for quiet when you started making demands and bringing your alien friends into this." He gestured broadly at Veltar and the other Zephyrians. "You see what happens when civilians think they can push around station security? Even the aliens think they can tell me how to do my job." Veltar's desperation was becoming visible now, his crystalline form actually flickering with distress. He knew that every second this continued, the situation was getting worse. Dr. Vasquez was not just respected among his people. She was practically considered a saint. 3 months ago, she had single-handedly prevented a plague that would have wiped out billions of Zephyrians. Their royal house had formally adopted her as family, an honor given to perhaps a dozen non-Zephyrians in their entire history. "Commander, please listen to me," Veltar said, his voice urgent now. "Dr. Elena Vasquez is the chief xenobiological consultant to the Terran Federation Council. She is the architect of the Universal Medical Protocols. She saved the Zephyrian homeworld from the Crimson Plague. She is a civilian with a civilian badge trying to get into a restricted area." Thornfield cut him off. "And you are an alien who needs to learn his place on a human station." The checkpoint area had grown quiet now. Conversations had stopped, and dozens of beings from multiple species were watching the confrontation unfold. Many of them recognized Elena Vasquez, and their expressions ranged from confusion to outright horror at what they were witnessing. A group of Andromedian merchants, their 6 arms frozen in mid-gesture, stared at the scene in disbelief. 2 Cillian dancers had stopped their graceful movement and stood perfectly still, their large eyes wide with shock. Even some humans in the area were beginning to look uncomfortable, sensing that something was very wrong. Veltar made one final attempt, his voice now carrying harmonics of desperate pleading that any Zephyrian would have recognized as the equivalent of someone begging for their life. "Commander, I am imploring you. Dr. Vasquez is not just any civilian. She has saved countless lives across the galaxy. She is considered family to our royal house. An insult to her is an insult to our entire civilization. Please just run the complete credential scan." Thornfield looked around at all the watching faces, human and alien alike, and felt his anger surge even higher. They were all staring at him, judging him, questioning his authority. Well, he'd show them all exactly who was in charge here. "You know what, Ambassador?" Thornfield said, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire checkpoint area. "I don't care if she's the Queen of Earth herself. I don't care what your royal house thinks about anything. And I especially don't care about your feelings regarding human station security." He turned back to Elena, his face red with fury and embarrassment. "And you, Doc, are starting to look more and more suspicious by the minute. Civilian trying to force her way into restricted areas, bringing alien diplomatic pressure to bear on human security." He reached for his communicator. "Maybe I should call for backup. Hold you for extended questioning." Elena Vasquez finally allowed a small smile to cross her face. though there was no humor in it. "Commander Thornfield," she said quietly, "I really think you should complete that credential scan now." But Thornfield was too far gone, too committed to his course of action, too proud to back down in front of so many witnesses. He had no idea that he was about to discover exactly who Elena Vasquez really was, and he had no idea that his next words would end his career forever. Something in Elena Vasquez's tone finally penetrated through Thornfield's anger. Maybe it was the absolute calm in her voice, or the way she said it like someone who was used to being obeyed. Maybe it was the growing crowd of aliens who looked like they were watching a disaster unfold in slow motion, or maybe it was the fact that his own scanner had been beeping insistently for the last 30 seconds, indicating that the basic scan was incomplete. Whatever it was, Thornfield found himself reaching for his scanner almost against his will. He'd show everyone that this civilian was exactly what she appeared to be. Nothing special, nothing important, just another human trying to punch above her weight in a galaxy full of real players. "Fine," he growled, jabbing his finger at the deep scan button. "Let's see what Dr. Nobody's credentials really say." The scanner hummed to life, its advanced sensors probing deeper into Elena's identification badge. What had been a simple civilian readout began to expand, line by line, detail by detail. Thornfield watched with growing confusion as authorization codes began to populate his screen. Level 7 diplomatic immunity. That was higher than his own clearance level. Emergency medical authorization across all Federation territories. That required Senate approval. Unlimited travel credentials to any system, any station, any facility in human space. Thornfield had never seen anything like it. But it was the next line that made his blood run cold. Chief Xenobiological Consultant to the Terran Federation Council. "That's not possible," he whispered, his face going pale. The Terran Federation Council only had 12 consultants, and they were the most important civilian advisors in human space. They reported directly to the President, advised on matters of galactic policy, and had authority that superseded almost everyone, except the highest military commanders. The scanner kept revealing more information. Cross-references to recent news feeds began to appear on his screen, and Thornfield felt his world begin to crumble around him. Dr. Elena Vasquez, lead researcher on the universal medical protocols that had revolutionized healthcare across 47 different species. Dr. Elena Vasquez, winner of the Galactic Service Medal for preventing the extinction of the Andromedian merchant fleet during the solar storm crisis. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human scientist who had developed the cure for the Crimson Plague that had threatened to wipe out billions of lives across 12 different homeworlds. 3 months ago, that's when it had happened. The plague that appeared out of nowhere, spreading faster than anyone could contain it. Entire systems had been quarantined. Planets had gone dark as their populations succumbed to a disease that seemed to target every known form of life. The galactic community had been hours away from complete collapse when a single human scientist had announced a breakthrough. Elena Vasquez had worked for 6 days straight without sleep, synthesizing a cure that shouldn't have been possible. She had used her expertise in xenobiology to create a treatment that worked across species barriers, something that had never been accomplished before. The cure had been distributed freely to every affected world, saving billions of lives and preventing the complete breakdown of galactic civilization, and Thornfield had just spent 20 minutes humiliating her in front of half the diplomatic quarter. His hands were shaking. Now as more details filled his screen, awards from governments across the galaxy, honorary citizenship in dozens of systems, formal recognition from species that rarely acknowledged non-members. The Zephyrian royal house had adopted her as family, the highest honor their civilization could bestow on an outsider. The Andromedian Trade Consortium had named a shipping route after her. The Cillian Council of Dancers had composed a ceremonial ballet in her honor. The crystalline hegemon had gifted her a piece of their homeworld's core crystal, something they had never done for any non-crystalline being. She wasn't just important. She was arguably the most respected human in the galaxy. Ambassador Veltar appeared at Thornfield's shoulder, his crystalline form still shimmering with distress. "Commander, now do you understand? Dr. Vasquez saved my homeworld. She saved my family, my children, my entire civilization. When the Crimson Plague reached Zephyr Prime, we had 6 hours before total population collapse. 6 hours. Thornfield stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. The woman he had called nobody special had saved more lives than everyone on Meridian Prime combined. The civilian he had mocked for thinking her badge meant something carried authorization from the highest levels of human government. She worked for 6 days without sleep, Veltar continued, his harmonics carrying tones of reverence that needed no translation. She refused to eat, refused to rest, refused to stop until she had found an answer. When other scientists said it was impossible, she made it possible. When governments prepared for the worst, she gave us hope. Other aliens had begun to approach the checkpoint now. Thornfield recognized some of them from his security briefings. High-ranking diplomats, trade representatives, military attachés. All of them were looking at Elena Vasquez with expressions of deep respect and admiration. An Andromedian merchant stepped forward, all 6 of his arms moving in the complex gesture that his species used to show ultimate gratitude. Dr. Vasquez saved our shipping fleet during the solar storm crisis, he said in accented standard. 17,000 crew members came home to their families because of her work. A Cillian dancer glided closer, her movements formal and reverent. The Council of Dancers has proclaimed her name in our most sacred ceremonies. She is honored among our people as one who preserves life and beauty in the galaxy. Thornfield felt like he was drowning. Every second brought new information, new understanding of exactly how catastrophically he had messed up. This wasn't just some diplomatic incident with a civilian. This was a career-ending disaster that could damage human relations with dozens of species. Elena Vasquez herself remained perfectly calm through all of this, watching Thornfield's growing horror with the same quiet composure she had shown throughout his entire tirade. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. "Commander, I tried to tell you that my credentials were in order." Thornfield looked at her, then at his scanner, then at the growing crowd of alien dignitaries who were watching him like he was some kind of exotic disaster. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to somehow make this right. But no words came out, because in the distance, he could see Station Commander Sarah Chen walking rapidly toward the checkpoint, her face set in an expression that promised consequences. Behind her came other senior officers drawn by reports of a diplomatic incident in the security sector. And behind them, more aliens were arriving. Word was spreading through the station's diplomatic quarter like wildfire. The human security commander who had humiliated Dr. Elena Vasquez, the woman who had saved the galaxy. Thornfield's career wasn't just over. It was about to become a cautionary tale told in diplomatic circles for decades to come. The scanner beeped one final time, completing its analysis. At the bottom of Elena's credentials, in small but unmistakable letters, was a notation that made Thornfield's blood turn to ice. Priority 1. Any interference with Dr. Vasquez's travel or activities must be reported immediately to the Federation Council, the President's office, and all relevant diplomatic channels. He had just created an interstellar incident with the most important civilian in human space, and everyone was about to find out. Station Commander Sarah Chen arrived at Checkpoint 7, like a woman walking to her own execution. She had been in her office reviewing routine reports when her communications officer had burst in with news that made her blood run cold. One of her security commanders was involved in a serious diplomatic incident with someone described only as a VIP of the highest priority. Now, seeing the crowd of alien dignitaries gathered around the checkpoint, seeing the obvious distress in their body language and hearing the urgent conversations in a dozen different languages, Chen knew this was going to be bad. What she didn't know was exactly how bad until she spotted the small, calm figure standing at the center of it all. "Dr. Elena Vasquez," she breathed, recognizing the woman immediately from the countless news feeds and government briefings she had seen over the past few months. Chen had never met the doctor personally, but every senior officer in human space knew that face. It was the face that had saved galactic civilization. Standing beside Elena was Commander Thornfield, who looked like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse in real time. His uniform was disheveled, his face pale and sweaty, and his hands were shaking as he stared at his scanner screen like it contained a death sentence. Which, Chen realized with growing horror, it probably did. "Commander Chen," Elena said warmly, stepping forward with a small smile. "It's good to see you again. I believe we met briefly at the Federation Day celebration last year." Chen's heart sank even further. Elena not only recognized her but remembered meeting her at a social function. This woman, who could have any station commander in human space reassigned with a single communication, remembered a brief introduction at a party. "Dr. Vasquez," Chen said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's an honor to have you aboard Meridian Prime. I do hope there hasn't been any difficulty with your transit?" Elena glanced at Thornfield, who was still staring at his scanner in shock. Commander Thornfield was simply being thorough with his security procedures, though I do think there may have been a small misunderstanding about my credentials. It was the most diplomatic way possible to describe what had clearly been a complete disaster. Chen felt a wave of gratitude toward Elena for not immediately throwing Thornfield under the nearest shuttle, followed by a wave of panic as she realized the full scope of what had happened. Ambassador Veltar approached, his crystalline form still shimmering with agitation. "Commander Chen, I feel I must inform you that Dr. Vasquez has been subjected to treatment that my government will find concerning. She was detained, questioned, and insulted by your security officer for nearly 30 minutes. Chen's stomach dropped to somewhere around her boots. The Zephyrian Royal Court was one of humanity's most important allies, and they were famously protective of anyone they considered family. If they filed a formal complaint about Elena's treatment, it could damage diplomatic relations for years. Additionally," Veltar continued, "Commander Thornfield made several remarks that my people would consider racially inappropriate. He referred to me as Crystal Face and suggested that aliens should learn their place on human stations. That was it." Chen could feel her own career beginning to crumble around the edges. A diplomatic incident was bad enough, but one involving racial slurs against alien dignitaries was the kind of career-ending catastrophe that made headlines across the galaxy. More aliens were arriving now, drawn by the commotion. Chen recognized trade representatives from the Andromedian Consortium, cultural attachés from the Cillian Council, and military observers from half a dozen different species. All of them were gathering around Elena like she was holding court, which Chen supposed she was in a way. "Dr. Vasquez," came a voice from the crowd. Chen turned to see Ambassador Kethvar of the Andromedian Trade Consortium, pushing through the gathering. "We heard there was some difficulty. Please tell me you were not harmed or threatened." Elena shook her head, still maintaining her diplomatic composure. "No harm was done, Ambassador. Just a routine security check that took a bit longer than expected." But Kethvar's 6 arms were already moving in agitated patterns that Chen recognized as expressions of serious concern. "Dr. Vasquez, with respect, any interference with your travel is a matter of significant concern to our people. Your work saved 17,000 of our merchant crews. We do not take such things lightly." Chen watched with growing dread as similar conversations began breaking out across the checkpoint area. It seemed like every alien present had some personal or cultural reason to be concerned about Elena's treatment. The woman hadn't just saved individual lives. She had apparently saved entire civilizations. Her communicator began beeping urgently. Chen glanced at the display and felt her heart skip a beat. Priority messages were flooding in from across the station. The diplomatic quarter was lighting up with communications to various homeworlds. Word was spreading fast and the responses were already coming back. "Commander Chen," her communications officer's voice crackled through the device. "I'm receiving urgent communications from the Zephyrian homeworld, the Andromedian Central Trade Authority, and the Cillian Cultural Ministry. They're all asking for immediate reports on Dr. Vasquez's status and treatment." Chen closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In 30 minutes, this had gone from a simple security checkpoint to an interstellar incident involving some of humanity's most important allies. And it was all because one security commander had decided to power trip on the wrong civilian. "There's more, Commander," her communications officer continued. "I'm receiving requests for statements from news organizations across human space. Someone leaked that Dr. Vasquez was detained and questioned by station security. The Federation News Network is asking for an official response." Elena must have heard the communications because she stepped closer to Chen with a concerned expression. "Commander, perhaps we could discuss this privately. I have no desire to see this situation escalate beyond what's necessary." But even as she spoke, Chen could see that it was already too late. The alien dignitaries were deep in urgent conversations with their respective governments. News of the incident was spreading through communication networks faster than Chen could track. And somewhere in the crowd, she could see Federation officials beginning to arrive, drawn by reports of a diplomatic crisis. Admiral Rebecca Torres, the station's liaison to the Federation Council, appeared at Chen's shoulder like a storm cloud given human form. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Chen had known Torres long enough to recognize the warning signs of barely controlled fury. "Commander Chen," Torres said quietly, "I've just received a priority communication from Earth. The President's office is asking for an immediate and detailed report on this incident. Apparently, they've been contacted directly by 3 different alien governments expressing concerns about Dr. Vasquez's treatment." Chen felt the last of her hope crumble away. When alien governments started contacting the President directly, careers didn't just end, they ended in disgrace with congressional hearings and public tribunals and questions about whether human officers could be trusted with diplomatic responsibilities. Elena seemed to sense the growing crisis and stepped forward again. "Admiral Torres, Commander Chen, I want to make it clear that I hold no ill will toward Commander Thornfield or station security. This was simply a misunderstanding that got out of hand." But Admiral Torres was already shaking her head. "Dr. Vasquez, with all due respect, this stopped being about personal feelings the moment 3 allied governments contacted Earth about the treatment of our most important civilian advisor. This is now a matter of interstellar relations and station security protocols." Chen looked over at Thornfield, who was still standing frozen at his checkpoint like a man in shock. In the space of 30 minutes, he had gone from a routine security assignment to being at the center of a diplomatic crisis that could affect human relations across the galaxy. And the worst part was, Chen realized this was probably just the beginning. Once word of this incident spread through official channels, there would be investigations, hearings, policy reviews, and diplomatic conferences. The name Thornfield was about to become synonymous with how not to handle VIP security. Elena Vasquez, the woman who had saved galactic civilization, had been humiliated by human security because one officer was too proud to run a proper credential scan. It was the kind of incident that would be studied in diplomatic academies for decades to come. 6 hours later, what had started as a simple security checkpoint had transformed into something unprecedented in the history of Meridian Prime. The main concourse of the diplomatic quarter had been converted into an impromptu gathering space, with representatives from over 30 different species arriving throughout the afternoon to pay their respects to Dr. Elena Vasquez. It wasn't planned. It wasn't official. It was simply what happened when word spread that the woman who had saved galactic civilization was passing through the station. Elena stood in the center of it all, looking overwhelmed but gracious as beings from across the galaxy approached to share their stories. Each conversation revealed another layer of her impact on the galactic community, another life saved or world preserved by her work. A delegation of young Zephyrian students had arrived from their homeworld, traveling specifically to meet the human who had saved their families. They sang a traditional song of gratitude in harmonics that made the station's walls vibrate with haunting beauty. Elena listened with tears in her eyes, understanding that this was how an entire civilization said thank you. The Andromedian Trade Consortium had sent a formal representative carrying a gift that left even seasoned diplomats speechless. It was a star chart made from crystallized space metals, showing the shipping routes that Elena's work had kept open during the solar storm crisis. Each route was marked with the names of the crews who had made it home safely because of her interventions. Cillian dancers performed a ballet that had been composed in Elena's honor, their graceful movements telling the story of healing and hope that her work represented to their people. The performance was so moving that even hardened military officers found themselves wiping away tears. Station Commander Chen watched from the edge of the gathering, still trying to process how quickly everything had changed. What had started as a diplomatic disaster had somehow transformed into a celebration of everything humanity represented at its best. The incident with Thornfield hadn't been forgotten, but it had been overshadowed by something much more important. Admiral Torres appeared beside Chen, her earlier fury replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" she asked quietly. Chen shook her head. "Never. I've been to state dinners and diplomatic receptions, but nothing like this." "This is genuine," Torres finished. "This isn't protocol or politics. This is real gratitude from real people whose lives she saved." As if summoned by their conversation, Elena approached them, having temporarily extracted herself from the crowd of well-wishers. She looked tired but happy, the stress of the morning's incident clearly forgotten in the face of so much unexpected warmth. "Commander Chen, Admiral Torres," she said with a smile. "I wanted to thank you for handling everything so gracefully today. I know this wasn't what anyone expected when I requested transit through your station." Chen felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Dr. Vasquez, I owe you an apology. What happened with Commander Thornfield was completely unacceptable. Our security protocols clearly failed, and..." Elena held up a hand, stopping the apology with a gentle gesture. "Commander, may I tell you something? In the past 6 months, I've traveled to over 40 different stations and facilities across human space. I've dealt with hundreds of security officers, administrators, and officials. Do you know what I've found?" Chen shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "The vast majority of them are good people doing difficult jobs under challenging circumstances. They're professionals who take their responsibilities seriously and treat everyone with respect regardless of species or status." Elena glanced toward where Thornfield had been escorted away hours earlier. "Commander Thornfield made mistakes today. Serious mistakes that will have consequences. But he doesn't represent humanity any more than I do." She gestured toward the gathering crowd, where humans and aliens mingled freely, sharing stories and laughter despite their different forms and cultures. "This is what represents humanity. The willingness to come together, to celebrate each other's successes, to build something better than what we could achieve alone." Admiral Torres nodded slowly. "The incident reports I've been filing today, they're not just about what went wrong. They're about what went right afterward. The way our staff responded. The way our allies supported you. The way everyone came together to turn a crisis into something positive." Elena smiled. "That's exactly what I mean. Yes, one person made some poor choices today, but hundreds of others made good choices. They chose understanding over anger, cooperation over conflict, unity over division." As they spoke, more beings continued to arrive. Chen recognized scientists from the Galactic Medical Alliance, trade representatives from a dozen different species, and cultural attachés who had traveled from across the sector. All of them had come for the same reason: to honor someone who embodied the best of what the galactic community could be. "Dr. Vasquez," came a voice from the crowd. Elena turned to see a group of Human Federation officials approaching, led by Senator Patricia Williams, the chair of the Galactic Relations Committee. "Senator Williams," Elena said with genuine surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here. When we heard what happened and then saw the response from our alien allies, we felt it was important to be here," Williams replied. "Dr. Vasquez, what we've witnessed today has been extraordinary. Not just the incident itself, but the way the galactic community rallied around you." Williams gestured toward the gathering crowd. "This isn't just about you, though you certainly deserve every bit of recognition you're receiving. This is about what humanity can accomplish when we focus on service rather than power, on healing rather than conquest, on building bridges rather than walls." Elena looked uncomfortable with the praise, as she always did when people tried to make her into some kind of symbol. "Senator, I'm just one person doing my job. There are thousands of humans across the galaxy doing similar work every day. Scientists, doctors, teachers, engineers, diplomats, people who may never make headlines but who represent the best of what we can be. And that's exactly why you matter so much," Williams replied. "Because you don't see yourself as special, even though everyone else does. Because you focus on the work instead of the recognition. Because you treat a security checkpoint the same way you treat a galactic crisis, with patience, professionalism, and grace." The crowd had grown quiet, listening to the conversation with obvious interest. Elena realized that she had become the center of attention again, which was the last thing she wanted. But Senator Williams wasn't finished. "The incident with Commander Thornfield will be investigated, and appropriate actions will be taken," Williams announced, her voice carrying across the gathering. "But what's more important is what we've all learned today. We've learned that respect and dignity aren't earned through rank or title, but through service to others. We've learned that true strength comes not from the power to command, but from the wisdom to understand. And we've learned that the best of humanity shines brightest when we focus on lifting others up, rather than tearing them down." Spontaneous applause broke out across the gathering, with beings from dozens of species showing their approval in their own cultural ways. Elena found herself at the center of a celebration that was about much more than her individual accomplishments. It was about hope. About the possibility that different species could work together for the common good. About the idea that intelligence and compassion could triumph over fear and ignorance. about the belief that the galaxy could be a place where everyone had value, regardless of their origin or status. Hours later, as the gathering finally began to disperse, Elena found herself sitting quietly in an observation lounge overlooking the station's main docking bays. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went in the distance, carrying their crews safely through the darkness between stars. Admiral Torres found her there, looking thoughtful and tired. "Penny for your thoughts?" Torres asked, settling into a nearby chair. Elena smiled. "I was just thinking about Commander Thornfield, about how different things might have been if he had simply completed that credential scan at the beginning. He made his choices," Torres said firmly, "and now he has to live with the consequences." "Yes, but that's not what I meant," Elena replied. "I was thinking about how easy it is to see only what we expect to see. He saw a civilian badge and assumed it meant I wasn't important. He saw my plain clothes and decided I didn't matter. He made judgments based on appearances rather than taking the time to learn who I really was." Torres nodded slowly, and by the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. "The thing is," Elena continued, "we all do that sometimes. We all make assumptions based on limited information. The difference is whether we're willing to admit when we're wrong and learn from our mistakes." She gestured toward the viewport, where alien ships moved gracefully through the traffic patterns around the station. "Look at all of this. Dozens of species working together, trading with each other, sharing knowledge and culture and friendship. 50 years ago, most of these civilizations had never even heard of each other. Now they're partners, allies, friends. Because people like you built bridges," Torres said quietly. Elena shook her head.